It's late autumn, a gray afternoon in a small riverside town. The cafe is quiet, the kind where mugs are chipped and the radio plays old jazz low in the background. Even now 31 sits alone in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone lukewarm. His eyes keep drifting to the rain tracing down the window as if he's somewhere else entirely. His jacket is dry, but his shoulders are heavy, like he's been carrying something for years. Across the cafe, Mr. Alden, mid-70s with a weathered face and steady eyes, notices him. He recognizes the profile instantly, though Evan hasn't yet looked his way. Alden lingers over his tea, quietly studying the small details, the way Evan stirs his coffee without drinking, the tired slump in his spine, the absence of even the faintest smile. When Evan gets up to leave, Alden stands too, intercepting him near the door, not with a grand gesture but a gentle, almost hesitant question. Do you still dream about the water? Evan freezes mid-step, the words cutting through years of silence. There's no accusation in Alden's tone, only quiet curiosity and the kind of softness that makes a person feel safe enough to answer, even if they don't want to. Evan chuckles dryly, but it's humorless. That was a long time ago, he mutters, brushing past. He pushes the door open, the bell above ringing faintly. Alden doesn't chase after him. He just steps aside, holding the door open in the rain. I'm here most afternoons, Alden says simply as Evan walks away. The words aren't a demand, just an invitation. A week later, Evan returns, not to talk, at least not at first. They sit in silence for a long time before Evan finally says, almost to himself, it was the look on your face when I pulled you out. Not fear, not relief, just like you'd already given up. He stares into his coffee. I know that look. I've been wearing it for years. The air between them shifts. This isn't about heroism or gratitude. It's about two people who've both stood at the edge of letting go. Alden doesn't thank him again. Instead, he tells Evan about his late wife, how she loved the river, and how after she passed he started walking out on the bridge during storms, thinking maybe he'd join her. That day, the accident with the car was almost convenient. They don't linger on the tragedy. Alden just meets Evan's eyes and says, but you pulled me back. You didn't just save me from the water, you reminded me I wasn't done yet. The words settle between them like a warm blanket on a cold night. Evan starts coming to the cafe more often. His posture eases, his gaze lifts more readily. Some days they talk, some days they just share the table in companionable silence. The rain still comes, the river still runs, but the heaviness he carries feels less suffocating. They begin walking the river path together in the early evenings. Alden brings a small flask of tea, Evan brings 2 muffins from the bakery down the street. They talk about little things, weather, books, the best fishing spots. But underneath it all is a quiet trust that doesn't need explaining. On the anniversary of the rescue, Alden slides a small, worn photograph across the table. It's of a young boy in a life jacket, grinning beside his father on a dock. On the back, in neat handwriting, because of you, I stayed long enough to watch my grandson grow up. Evan holds the photo for a long time before slipping it into his wallet. They don't hug, they don't cry, just a shared nod. Two men who once met in a moment of chaos, now grounded in the quiet certainty that neither of them carries their weight alone anymore. A small riverside cafe, late afternoon. Outside, the rain is steady, not dramatic but unrelenting. Evan, 31, sits alone in a corner booth. The light through the rain-streaked glass is dim, gray-blue, making the steam from his coffee more visible than the coffee itself. He wears a work jacket with the name patch half torn, sleeves pushed up like someone who's used to being busy but hasn't done much lately. He absently spins his spoon in the mug. His eyes are there but not there. Across the room, Mr. Alden, mid-70s, thin frame under a brown wool coat, sits with both hands wrapped around a teacup. His movements are deliberate, as if conserving energy. He watches Evan, not staring, but studying the subtleties, the way he doesn't check his phone, the faint crease between his brows, the way his jaw tightens every few minutes for no obvious reason. Evan leaves money on the table and starts for the door. Alden times his movement to intersect, rising slowly, cane in hand. Do you still dream about the water? Alden's voice is steady, quiet, not prying but oddly specific. Evan stops mid-step, the bell above the cafe door swinging softly in the draft. He doesn't answer, just looks at Alden for the first time. Recognition flickers, but so does discomfort. He mutters, that was a long time ago, and pushes the door open. The rain greets him, cold and fine. Alden doesn't follow. From behind, Alden's voice drifts out, I'm here most afternoons. It's not an ask, not an order. Just a statement. Evan keeps walking, shoulders hunched, the rain mixing with the faint heat of shame. A week later, Evan is back. He tells himself it's just for coffee, but when he sees Alden at the same table, he doesn't leave. He sits opposite him. After a long silence, Evan speaks, eyes fixed on the rain outside. You didn't look scared. The day I pulled you out, you looked done, like it didn't matter. A pause. His voice lowers, I know that look. I've had it in my mirror more times than I want to admit. Alden takes a slow breath, then tells his own story. His wife Eleanor had died just 6 months before the accident. He'd started walking out to the bridge during storms, staring at the current until his chest felt empty enough to match the water. That day, the car's skid into the river had felt almost like fate. He doesn't dress it up, doesn't try to inspire, just says, you pulled me out anyway. And I've thought every day since about what I would have missed. Evan's jaw tightens. The sound of rain fills the pause between them. Evan starts visiting more often. Sometimes they talk about books Alden is reading. Sometimes they sit in silence with their drinks. Evan's posture changes slowly over the weeks. Shoulders less drawn in, gaze less fixed on the floor. He begins showing up clean-shaven. Some mornings he brings muffins for both of them. They start walking the river path together after coffee. Alden brings a thermos of tea, Evan 2 paper cups. They talk about fishing, favorite diners, how the river changes color with the season. Neither mentions the rescue again, but the unspoken weight of that day hums under every conversation. On the 15th anniversary of the rescue, Alden arrives at the cafe carrying a small brown envelope. Inside, a photograph of a boy, maybe 10, wearing a bright orange life jacket, grinning next to Alden on a dock. On the back, my grandson Caleb, born the year after you pulled me out. Because of you, I got to meet him. Evan turns the photo over, stares at it. His throat tightens. He slips it into his wallet without a word. They sit a while longer, the rain easing outside. Not much is said, but when they part, Evan's goodbye comes with the faintest, genuine smile. The kind that hasn't been there in years. It's the kind of rain that makes the air smell metallic, like the river is breathing. Inside the cafe, the light is low, filtered through windows streaked with water. The place hums faintly, the hiss of the espresso machine, the muted clink of a spoon against ceramic. Even 31 sits alone in a corner booth. His work jacket is zipped halfway, a fray in the cuff where threads have curled. His coffee has gone cold, but he keeps staring it. Every now and then he glances toward the door, not like he's expecting someone, more like he's making sure no one comes in. At a table near the window, Mr. Alden, mid-70s, leans slightly forward over his tea. His movements are deliberate, almost ritualistic, stirring sugar with slow precision, folding the paper napkin just so. He watches Evan the way some people watch rain, patient, unhurried, as though time isn't the thing that matters. When Evan rises to leave, Alden does too. They meet in the narrow aisle between tables. Alden's voice is soft, but the words land like a pebble breaking the surface of still water. Do you still dream about the water? The air stills. The only sound is rain tapping the glass. Evan's eyes lift slowly to meet his. Recognition flickers, but so does something else, a tension he's kept buried. He doesn't answer, just mutters, "That was a long time ago," and heads for the door. As he steps into the rain, Alden calls after him, not loud, not chasing, "I'm here most afternoons." Evan walks fast, hands jammed in his pockets. The rain finds the gap between his collar and his neck. He tells himself the old man's wrong. He hasn't thought about that day in years. But the truth is, he dreams about it more often than he admits, waking up with the smell of river water in his lungs. A week later, Evan comes back. He doesn't plan to sit with Alden, but when their eyes meet, there's a quiet inevitability. Alden gestures toward the chair across from him, and Evan sits. They sip their drinks in silence until Evan says, without looking up, "You didn't look scared that day. You looked finished. Like it didn't matter if I got you out or not." His voice softens. "I know that look. I've seen it in my mirror." Alden exhales slowly. His gaze drifts to the window. Eleanor had been gone 6 months. 48 years married, and then just me. He doesn't dramatize it, just states it like the weather. He explains how he started walking the bridge in storms, not thinking about jumping, not thinking about staying, just existing at the edge. The day the car skidded off the road into the river, he'd felt almost ready. But then you were there, pulling me back like you'd done it before. And I thought, maybe I'm not done yet. Evan starts showing up more. At first it's coincidence, or that's what he tells himself. But soon it's routine. Some days they talk about nothing, weather, fishing, the strange man who feeds the ducks by the pier. Other days they just sit, the quiet between them feeling less like absence and more like space. Evan's appearance changes subtly, shaves more often, eyes less sunken. One afternoon he brings muffins, doesn't say why. Alden doesn't ask. They start walking together after coffee. Alden moves slowly, his cane making a soft rhythm on the path. The river is always nearby, glinting in the late sun or brooding under clouds. They share stories in fragments. A bad fishing trip, a high school football game, the first job Evan hated. The rescue itself is never mentioned again, but it lingers in the quiet trust between them. On the 15th anniversary, Alden brings a small brown envelope. Inside, a photo of a young boy in a bright orange life jacket, standing on a dock, grinning into the camera. Alden is next to him, hand on the boy's shoulder. On the back, in neat handwriting, "My grandson Caleb, born the year after you pulled me from the river. Because of you, I was there to meet him." Evan studies the photo for a long time. He slips it into his wallet. They don't hug. They don't cry. Finish their coffee, step outside into the fresh, post-rain air and walk the river path side by side. The rain outside isn't heavy, just steady, the kind that turns streets into muted mirrors. The cafe is a narrow space with mismatched chairs and a smell of brewed coffee that clings to the air. Evan, 31, sits in the corner booth like he's hiding from the world. His coffee sits untouched, steam fading away. One knee bounces under the table, betraying a restlessness he tries to mask. A leather watch on his wrist is cracked, worn, clearly old, clearly important. At the far side, Mr. Alden, mid-70s, is framed in the soft light of the window. He cradles a teacup with both hands, his fingers knotted with age. He's not staring at Evan, but every so often, his eyes lift from the tea, and there's a flicker of recognition. Noticing the way Evan's gaze keeps going distant. Noticing the absence of a smile. Noticing the weight. When Evan stands to leave, chair legs scraping faintly against the worn floorboards, Alden rises too. They meet near the doorway, rain in view just beyond the glass. Alden's tone is quiet, deliberate. "Do you still dream about the water?" It's not a challenge. Not even really a question. More like someone opening a door they're willing to stand beside. Evan freezes. He doesn't answer, just mutters, "That was a long time ago," and pushes out into the rain. Alden doesn't follow, just calls after him in the gentlest way, "I'm here most afternoons." The rain clings to Evan's hair and jacket. He walks fast, like if he moves quickly enough, the question won't catch him. But that night, in the half dark of his small apartment, He sits on the edge of the bed and hears it again in his head. Do you still dream about the water? He knows the answer. A week later, Evan walks back into the cafe. He tells himself it's for coffee, but his eyes find Alden almost instantly. They sit together without ceremony, without greeting. Steam rises from their cups. The clock on the wall ticks too loudly. Evan finally says without looking up, "You didn't look scared that day. You looked finished, like it didn't matter." A pause. "I know that look. I've worn it." Alden's eyes drift to the rain outside. His voice stays steady, but there's a softness under it. Helena was gone 6 months by then. 48 years married, and then it was just me. I wasn't thinking about leaving, not really. I just stopped thinking about staying. He takes a sip of tea before continuing. That day, the car, and then you were there. I didn't fight it. No thank you. No dramatics. Just truth. Evan starts showing up more. At first, it's once a week, then twice, then it's most afternoons. Some days they talk about nothing. Old baseball games, favorite diners, the dog that wanders by the river. Other days they sit in silence, the air between them easy, not strained. Evan's posture changes. He no longer folds in on himself. He's not smiling yet, but the permanent crease between his brows begins to soften. One morning he brings muffins. He doesn't explain. Alden doesn't ask. They start walking the river path after coffee. Alden's cane makes a steady, grounding tap against the pavement. The river is always part of the background, glinting gold at sunset, or dark and restless under gray clouds. Conversations come in fragments. Evan talks about the first car he ever fixed. Alden tells a story about fishing with his wife. They never mention the rescue, but it's there in the undercurrent, in the fact that both of them keep showing up. On the 15th anniversary, Alden arrives with a small, weathered envelope. Inside, a photograph of a young boy in a bright orange life jacket, laughing with his arm around Alden's neck on a dock. On the back, written neatly, "Caleb, my grandson. Born the year after you pulled me out. Because of you, I met him." Evan stares at the photo, jaw tight. He tucks it into his wallet without a word. They finish their coffee. Outside, the rain has stopped, leaving the air clean. They walk the river path again, side by side, the water moving quietly beside them. It's a soft, steady rain, the kind that turns streets into watercolor reflections. Inside the cafe, the air is warm but carries the faint smell of wet coats and brewed coffee. Evan, 31, sits in the corner booth. Not slouched exactly, more folded into himself. His coffee is cooling in front of him, untouched, the surface faintly rippling from the hum of footsteps passing by. His hands rest on either side of the mug, not holding it, just there for something to do. The muted jazz on the radio stutters through a static patch. Evan doesn't notice. His gaze is fixed somewhere far beyond the window where rain snakes down the glass in uneven trails. Across the room, Mr. Alden, mid-70s, sits with his tea. His wool coat is neatly folded on the seat beside him, his cane propped against the wall. He's the kind of man who moves slowly not because he's weak, but because he sees no reason to rush. His eyes keep finding Evan, not searching, just recognizing something. When Evan finally stands, chair legs scraping against the floor, Alden rises too. The cafe's air shifts. A subtle stillness as their paths cross near the door. Alden's voice is low, even, almost gentle enough to be mistaken for small talk. "Do you still dream about the water?" It lands with a weight Evan can't immediately place. Or maybe doesn't want to. His eyes flick to Alden's, searching for intent. He exhales through his nose, mutters, "That was a long time ago," and pushes through the door into the rain. Behind him, Alden doesn't move. Just says, "I'm here most afternoons," like an open door left ajar. The rain is cool but fine, coating Evan's hair, softening the edges of the street. He shoves his hands into his jacket pockets, head down, walking fast. But that night, in the dim light of his apartment, he finds himself leaning on the kitchen counter, staring at the tap as water runs into a glass. The sound reminds him of the river, steady, endless. He shuts it off and stands in silence. A week later, he's back in the cafe, tells himself it's coincidence, but his feet move without hesitation toward the same corner. Alden is there. Doesn't smile, doesn't wave. Just tilts his head toward the seat opposite him. Evan sits. For a while, the only sound is spoons against mugs and the occasional hiss from the espresso machine. Finally, Evan speaks, his voice low, almost lost in the ambient hum. "You didn't look scared that day. You looked like it didn't matter. And I know that look. I've seen it in my mirror." Alden's eyes don't leave Evan's. He nods slowly. Eleanor was gone 6 months. 48 years married, and then nothing. "I wasn't thinking about leaving. I just stopped thinking about staying." He sips his tea before adding, "That day the car went in, and I didn't fight it. Then you were there, and suddenly I wasn't alone in it anymore." He doesn't thank him. Doesn't turn it into a lesson. Just lets it sit. Evan starts coming back. At first it's every few days, then most afternoons. Some days they talk. About fishing, the smell of the river in autumn, the coffee being stronger on Tuesdays for some reason. Other days they just sit, the silence between them lighter than before. Evan begins shaving more often. He's not smiling yet, but his face looks less like it's holding something back. One day he brings a paper bag with 2 muffins, slides one across without explanation. Alden doesn't ask. They start walking the river path after coffee. Alden's cane makes a measured tap on the pavement. Evan matches his pace without needing to be asked. The river is always part of the scene, reflecting late sunlight one day, dark and heavy under storm clouds the next. They share pieces of themselves in fragments. Evan's first car repair, Alden's favorite fishing spot with Eleanor, the worst cup of coffee either of them ever had. The rescue never comes up, but it's there, in every step, every pause, every quiet nod. On the 15th anniversary, Alden arrives with a small brown envelope. Inside, a photograph of a boy maybe 10 wearing a bright orange life jacket, his grin so wide it almost spills off the frame. Alden stands beside him, arm around his shoulders, looking directly into the lens. On the back, in neat handwriting, Caleb, my grandson. Born the year after you pulled me from the water. Because of you, I met him. Evan stares at it for a long time, jaw tight. He tucks the photo into his wallet. They finish their drinks in silence, then step outside. The rain has stopped, leaving the air smelling of wet pavement and clean river. They walk the path again, side by side, not speaking, but with the quiet certainty that the weight neither of them could carry alone is now shared. The rain has been falling since morning. The kind that isn't violent, just insistent, patient enough to soak through the day. The streets outside are slick mirrors, each puddle rippling with tiny concentric circles. Cafe, the smell is a mix of dark roast coffee and damp wool. The hum of a refrigerator in the back fills the silence between clinks of cups. The glass door fogs slightly every time it opens. Avon, 31, sits in a back booth. His posture isn't a slouch, it's more like he's guarding something in his chest. His work jacket is zipped halfway, frayed at the cuffs. The leather band of his watch is cracked, the face scratched, but it's wound and ticking. He's been here for nearly 20 minutes, coffee untouched. He stirs it absently, spoon-tapping the ceramic in an irregular rhythm. Every now and then, his eyes lift to the window, not to watch the rain but to look through it, as if the world on the other side has nothing to do with him anymore. At a small table near the window, Mr. Alden, mid-70s, sits with his tea. His coat, folded neatly on the chair beside him, leaves a faint scent of old tobacco and cedar. His hands are long, veins raised like old river beds. Every so often, without really meaning to, he glances toward Evan, the way one might glance at a photograph you've seen before but can't quite place. Evan rises, placing a few bills under his mug. The scrape of his chair legs on the wooden floor draws Alden's eyes. They cross paths near the door, the bell above it swaying slightly with the draft. Alden speaks before Evan can push it open. His voice is even, not pressing, almost conversational. Do you still dream about the water? The words land with a strange weight, heavier than the tone that carried them. Evan stops, hand on the doorframe, rain blurring the street beyond. His eyes meet Alden's, searching for accusation or pity, finding neither. Just a calm, patient interest. The kind of curiosity that isn't nosy, just human. Evan exhales sharply through his nose. That was a long time ago, he says, and steps out into the rain. From behind him, Alden's voice follows, quiet, steady. I'm here most afternoons. Not an invitation, not a plea, just a fact left like a door unlocked. The rain is fine and cold, the kind that soaks you slowly. Evan walks fast, head down, hands jammed deep into his jacket pockets. But later that night, standing in his kitchen, he turns the tap on to fill a glass. The sound of the water hitting the sides, steady, relentless, brings him back to the sound of the river that day. He shuts the tap off halfway, staring into the half-filled glass like it might accuse him. A week later, he's back. Tells himself it's habit. Coffee, that's all. Alden is at the same table. No smile, no nod, just the smallest tilt of his head toward the chair across from him. Evan sits. They say nothing for a long time. Just the soft hiss of milk steaming, the occasional rattle of coins in the register. When Evan finally speaks, his voice is low, nearly lost in the cafe's hum. You didn't look scared that day. You look like it didn't matter, and I know that look. I've had it. Alden doesn't rush to fill the silence that follows. He lets it sit, lets Evan's words settle like dust in an empty room. Finally he says, Elena had been gone 6 months, 48 years married, and then it was just me. He looks at his tea before continuing. I wasn't thinking about leaving. I just stopped thinking about staying. His eyes lift to meet Evan's. That day, I didn't fight the water. But then you were there and I thought, maybe I'm not finished yet. He doesn't thank him. Doesn't try to explain more than that. Evan comes back the next week, and the week after, then more often. Sometimes they talk about the weather, about books neither has read, about the man who feeds ducks down by the pier every morning. Sometimes they sit in silence, watching the rain. One day, Evan brings muffins, doesn't say why. Alden doesn't ask. They start walking the river path after coffee. Alden's cane taps a steady beat on the damp pavement. The river, always present, shifts its moods, glassy and gold at sunset, restless and black under storm clouds. Their conversations come in fragments. Evan tells him about the first car he ever fixed. Alden shares the story of the fishing rod Eleanor gave him for their first anniversary. The rescue is never mentioned. But it's there, in every unspoken pause, in every quiet step they take side by side. On the 15th anniversary, Alden brings an envelope, worn soft at the corners. Inside, a photograph of a boy, maybe 10, wearing a bright orange life jacket, hair messy from wind, grinning at the camera. Alden stands beside him, arm on his shoulder. On the back, in neat, careful handwritings, Caleb, my grandson, born the year after you pulled me from the water. Because of you, I met him. Evan stares at the photo for a long moment, his jaw tightens. He slips it into his wallet without a word. They finish their drinks, step outside. The rain has stopped, but the streets still shine. They walk the river path again, not speaking, not needing to. 15 years later, Ethan, now in his early 30s, sits alone in a dim rain-speckled corner booth of a small-town diner just after midnight. The only sounds are the slow hum of the fridge and the clink of a spoon against a mug. He stirs his coffee without drinking, staring out the fogged window. There's a heaviness about him, the kind you only notice if you've carried your own. His shoulders curve inward, eyes fixed somewhere far away. His watch is slightly cracked, his clothes are clean but worn. In the far corner, an elderly man, Mr. Lawson, 80s, reads the newspaper slowly, like someone stretching time. He looks up occasionally, watching Ethan, not with suspicion, but with quiet recognition. The way you watch a stranger whose pain feels oddly familiar. Mr. Lawson eventually gets up to refill his tea. On the way back, he pauses by Ethan's table. You've been staring at that coffee for 20 minutes? He says gently, no judgment in his voice. What are you really waiting for? Ethan blinks, caught off guard. Excuse me. Coffee's not much of a companion. The old man smiles faintly. Though it tries, it's an oddly tender intrusion, and for a moment, Ethan almost smiles. Ethan shifts in his seat, masking discomfort with a shrug. I'm fine. Just thinking, he mutters the universal code for please leave me alone. Mr. Lawson doesn't push. Instead, he nods as if Ethan's answer makes perfect sense and walks back to his seat. But he keeps reading in silence, his presence still felt steady, unhurried. The diner clock ticks. The rain keeps falling. Half an hour later, Ethan speaks, not looking at the man. 15 years ago, I pulled a man from a car. It had crashed into a river. His voice is low, almost swallowed by the diner hum. I was just a kid. Never even knew if he made it. He stirs his coffee again, his hand trembling slightly. Some nights, I dream I didn't get him out in time. It's not a confession. It's a fracture in the wall he's been holding up. Mr. Lawson closes his newspaper. There's no gasp, no dramatic reveal. Just a soft exhale. You did. Ethan turns confused. I know, Mr. Lawson says. Because I was that man. The words hang there, not triumphant, not tearful. Just true. I've been hoping I'd get to say thank you. He adds quietly, his hands trembling in the faint diner light. They sit in silence for a while, the kind that feels alive. The rain lightens outside. Ethan finally takes a sip of the coffee. There's no cinematic swell of music, but something inside him shifts, a thread untangling. The weight of not knowing begins to loosen its grip. Over the next months they meet often, always by chance at first, then less by accident. Sometimes they talk, sometimes they just share space. Mr. Lawson brings stories from his life, not as lessons but as gifts. Ethan in return finds himself laughing more, asking questions, remembering how to be curious again. They start to meet on Sundays at the same booth, two men who understand each other's silences. One evening as Ethan leaves the diner, Mr. Lawson slides a small envelope across the table. Inside is a photo, grainy water, streaked, of a teenage boy hauling an old man to the riverbank. On the back, in uneven handwriting, you pulled me from more than the water. Ethan walks into the night with the envelope in his pocket, rain falling soft and warm. The grief is still there. But for the first time in years, he isn't carrying it alone. A small-town diner bathed in the amber glow of flickering neon. Rain slicks the parking lot outside, the reflections shifting in puddles as occasional headlights pass. Inside, Ethan, early 30s, tired eyes, faint stubble, wearing a worn gray hoodie over a plaid shirt, sits in the farthest booth. His coffee is untouched, steam long gone. The jukebox in the corner hums softly, but no music plays. Cinematic tones still. Lonely, like time itself is holding its breath. In the opposite corner, Mr. Lawson, mid-80s, thin frame, wool cardigan, reading glasses halfway down his nose, slowly flips through a newspaper. He sips tea from a chipped white mug. The way he folds the paper is precise, like someone who grew up in a slower, more deliberate time. His eyes occasionally lift toward Ethan with a subtle familiarity. Cinematic tone. Warm, observational, understated. Mr. Lawson walks toward the counter for a tea refill, passing Ethan's booth. He stops mid-step. You've been staring at that coffee for 20 minutes, he says with a faint, knowing smile. Ethan glances up, startled. I guess I'm just thinking? Mr. Lawson nods like he understands more than Ethan's words are saying. He moves on without lingering. Cinematic tone. The flicker of connection, small but noticeable. Back in his corner, Mr. Lawson doesn't look over again, but Ethan feels the man's presence like a quiet weight in the air. The rain outside deepens, drops racing down the fogged windows. The clock above the counter ticks louder than before. Ethan stares into his cup, caught between wanting to leave and wanting to say something. Without lifting his head, Ethan speaks, voice low. 15 years ago, I pulled a man from a car in the river. Mr. Lawson's paper stops mid-turn. I was 16. Never found out if he made it. Ethan's knuckles tighten on his mug. Sometimes I dream I didn't get him out in time. Cinematic tone, heavy, confessional, almost whispered to the rain. Mr. Lawson folds his newspaper with deliberate care. You did, he says softly. Ethan turns, confusion clouding his face. I know because I was that man, Mr. Lawson continues. His voice isn't trembling. It's steady, weighted with years of waiting to say this. Been hoping I'd get the chance to thank you. Cinematic tone, quiet earthquake, no raised voices, just the weight of truth. They both sit in silence. Outside, the rain begins to soften. Ethan looks at Mr. Lawson, really looks at him, and sees not just an old man, but the man he once pulled gasping onto a muddy riverbank. His chest feels both lighter and heavier at once. Mr. Lawson signals the waitress. Bring another cup, he says, nodding toward Ethan. They drink in quiet, the kind where you don't need to fill space with words. Ethan keeps glancing at Mr. Lawson like he's afraid the man might vanish. Cinematic tone, tender, tentative trust. They start running into each other more often, sometimes at the diner, sometimes in the park. At first, they exchange short greetings. Then, the conversations stretch longer. Mr. Lawson shares stories from his youth, his war service, his late wife. Ethan begins to talk about his own life, the jobs he left, the dreams he shelved, the family he feels distant from. Cinematic tone, slow blooming, like winter easing into spring. One rainy evening, Ethan slides into the booth and finds an envelope waiting. Mr. Lawson is already there, sipping tea. Inside, a faded, water-damaged photo. A teenage boy pulling an older man toward the muddy bank. On the back, in shaky handwriting, you pulled me from more than the water. Ethan looks up, eyes wet. Mr. Lawson smiles, no words needed. Cinematic tone, emotional culmination, soft, not dramatic but deeply human.